Okay, let's go ahead and review Welcome to Chinatown. That was our story of the week, so we can review for your test. So, in this selection, a group of reporters tells about San Francisco's Chinatown, and one of the purpose for reading is to learn the history and the culture of that neighborhood. We know that in this Reader's Theater's story, we have different characters who are co hosts on a television travel show, and they give us different information about Chinatown. We also learned that Chinatown was rebuilt after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, and all the buildings were redesigned. So, um, Chinatown is now different because the buildings looked more like the buildings in China. On this part, we're introduced to Connor and Amy, who are reporters, and they give us information on a part of Chinatown called Grant Avenue. And they also tell us about just interesting features Chinatown has, such as the Dragon Gate, Portsmouth Square, and how there's also a Chinese New Year's parade. And we learn about the importance of food and culture. Um, we learn that people in Chinatown buy oranges in January to give them to their friends as gifts. So, oranges are a special food to the Chinese, they symbolize happiness. And then we also learn about um, the markets and how they have different types of food found in China. And they sell them here as well as restaurants. They also tell us about different grocery stores that you would find in Chinatown that carry different ingredients that you would use in different recipes, like Chinese recipes. They would have different like types of rice or different types of seafood, and they would offer different many foods from Asia. So in this page it tells us about just different aspects of the Chinese culture, like a traditional New Year's parade and different types of food called dim sum. So the author must have thought this city in Chinatown in San Francisco was very fascinating. How there's just different things to see and do in Chinatown. If you were to take a look at a travel article and the story Chinatown, they would be similar because they both would have information about visiting an interesting city. Comprehension Strategies Review. Reading Fiction. Bridge to Reading for Meaning. Realistic fiction has character settings and events that are like people, places, and events in real life. In realistic fiction, a character's actions are affected by his or her motivations, the plot, and the setting. The notes on page 659 point out some features of realistic fiction, including setting, characters, and plot events. How can understanding these features help you read realistic fiction? Review the focus strategies. If you don't understand what you are reading, use the comprehension strategies you learned about in this theme. Use story structure. Use story structure to understand how the character setting and plot events fit together in a story. Ask questions. As you read, stop and ask yourself questions about characters, the setting, or plot events to make sure you understand what you are reading. As you read Amelia's Garden on pages 660 through 663, think about where and how to use these strategies. Think about the characters. Characters are the people in a story. They are like real people, and they often learn a lesson or change by the end of a story. The setting is where and when a story takes place. The authors of realistic fiction use a setting that is real or could be real. Plot events. Plot events are the actions that take place in the story. The characters and the setting affect the plot of events. Apply the strategies. Read this story about Amelia and her neighbors. As you read, use different comprehension strategies such as asking questions to help you understand the text. Stop and think. Pay attention to the characters' words and actions to help you understand the plot. use story structure. Amelia's Garden, written by Miriam Kirby, illustrated by Sarah Frieden. To Amelia, it seemed the whole world had traveled to Adams Avenue. Her neighbors came from far away and spoke many languages. Amelia's grandmother said, "All those strange sound words. What an awful noise." Amelia thought the mixed together voices sounded like music. Mrs. Yazdani chanted in Persian. Mr. and Mrs. Kwan called for their 4 children in Chinese. Mr. Leder and Mr. Strauss played chess and bickered happily in Hebrew and German. Senor Sanchez always greeted Amelia in Spanish. "Buenos dias." "Good morning, Amelia." When Amelia said "Buenos dias" to Mrs. Yazdani, she turned away. Mrs. Kwan was leaning out her window, hanging laundry. Amelia shouted, "Buenos dias." Mrs. Kwan screeched and dropped a soggy sock on Amelia's head. That day, Amelia realized her neighbors didn't speak to each other. Everyone said hello to Amelia. They smiled and waved when she walked down the street. Why did people talk to her but not to each other? Amelia asked her grandmother about it. Gran said, "Peas grow in pods, crows fly in flocks." "What does that mean?" Gran explained. "People like people just like themselves. They're afraid of anyone different." "But Gran, people are just people." "Yes, child, but their different languages make them different." "That's the silliest thing I've ever heard," said Amelia. Amelia studied what made people different. She decided people were not alike at all. They only thought they were. Strangest of all, thinking you were the same as a few people made you different from everyone else. People were like flowers, all of them pretty in their own way. Amelia imagined a garden, but nothing but blue petunias. How boring. She could help her neighborhood be like a garden, brimming with every kind of flower. Amelia earned some money by babysitting the Kwan's 4 children. She bought marigold seeds and a little shovel. Then she walked up Adams Avenue to the lot across from Mrs. Yazdani's house. The lot was piled with old tires and wooden boxes, cans and cardboard, pieces of automobiles, rags and ropes, and cracked china cups. Cats hid among the trash and hissed if anyone came close. Amelia tugged a tire away. She turned the earth with her shovel, scattered the marigold seeds, and covered them with dirt. Then she ran home for water to pour over the seeds to make them grow. One day, tiny green leaves pushed up from the soil. Amelia called to Miss Yazdani, "My marigolds are growing." Mrs. Yazdani broke a branch from the geranium on her windowsill. She dug a hole for the geranium in Amelia's garden, tucked dirt around the stem, and watered it from her teacup. Every day, Mrs. Yazdani carried water to her geranium. Soon, the geranium grew new leaves, and Amelia's marigolds grew little buds. Next, Amelia discovered 2 small palm trees near her marigolds. Senor Sanchez sloshed buckets of water on the trees to keep them green. Mr. Strauss and Mr. Leder pushed wooden boxes together to make a table and chairs in Amelia's garden. They unfolded their chessboard and played there every afternoon. Day after day, plants grew taller and the garden grew larger. People admired Amelia's marigolds. Bit by bit, they carried trash away and planted roses and daisies. Senor Sanchez planted corn. Gran planted black-eyed peas. Mr. Strauss planted tomatoes. Mr. Leder planted lettuce so they could make salads. The Kwan children filled stacked tires for blackberry vines. In Amelia's garden, people talked to each other and smiled. Senor Sanchez learned to say "ni hao ma," which means "hello, how are you" in Chinese. Mrs. Kwan learned from Mrs. Yazdani that the best part of Persian rice is the golden stuff at the bottom of the pot. Mr. Leder finally beat Mr. Strauss at chess and told everyone, twice at least. Gran agreed with Amelia. All those different languages did sound like music when you listened to them in just the right way. So don't forget to stop and think as you read. Stop and ask yourself questions about the characters, the setting, the plot of events, and how they all work together to tell the story.